We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and that's a lot of fish. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's reboot month, and this week we are talking the 1998 film Godzilla. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the first in a brand new species of co-host, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. It's been some time since I have dived back into this movie, so I'm excited to revisit it and see what it's all about.
How was that nickname? Is that too contrived? Because Godzilla in this movie is the first in a new species. I was kind of working it in. What do you think?
It's not the worst you've done.
Certainly not the best either, but I appreciate the hashtag PP mindset there, Andrew. I also have not seen this movie in a very long time. Of course, before watching it this week, preparing for this podcast, I thought I had. I know I saw it in theaters. I have some pretty vivid memories of seeing it in theaters. And I thought I saw it, maybe a bunch of times back in the day. But rewatching it this week, I realized I don't know this movie very well. There were some key scenes, certainly, that I remembered. But maybe like 40 minutes into the movie, I'm like, oh, this is going into the climax, right? It's about to wrap up here, right? And there's this entire chunks that I did not remember.
So much more movie.
There's a lot of movie. No one can take that away from this movie. It's a lot of movie.
It is. I had the same experience. Like, I know I saw this in theaters. This was 1998. I was 11 or about to be 11. So that was one of the things that I remember vividly of my childhood is my dad would take me and my siblings to the movies anytime there was some big new blockbuster release. It was usually me and my sister. Sometimes my brother was along too, depending on what it was. But thanks, Dad. But yeah, I know I would have seen this in theaters. It would have been the kind of thing that we went to watch. And then I know we owned it on tape even, because this was probably right getting towards the end of the VHS DVD era. And yeah, it was around a lot when I was a child. This is another one of my mom likes this movie a lot. This is another one that my mom,
of course,
likes. She likes her some Matthew Broderick. So no hard sell for her there to watch this. But so it was on a lot as I was a kid. Like, I saw it a lot. We'd just watch it by, somebody would throw it on or be on TV or something. But it's probably been 15 plus years since I've gone back, especially in rewatched the whole thing. I know I've probably seen clips of it here and there, maybe
Sure.
seen part of it on TV, but it has been some time since I've gone back and rewatched the whole thing. And I had the same experience. There are things of the movie that I remember vividly, but if you asked me how they defeat Godzilla in this movie, I probably wouldn't have remembered. But I do remember.
That's definitely one of the sequences I did not remember.
I do remember Madison Square Garden being a thing. I remember that was part of it. But yeah, there's whole parts of this movie that were just blank. So it was definitely interesting going back and rewatching it and kind of being oh, I don't know this movie as well as I thought I did.
Before we go too much farther into Godzilla, Andrew, last week we covered The Mummy, the 2017 one starring Tom Cruise. You remember that, Andrew?
Yep. Yes, I do.
Someone actually wrote in with some of their positive thoughts on The Mummy. It didn't make it into that episode, So I want to acknowledge that now. This is from Mike Lynch. He dropped it in our Discord and says, the 2017 Mummy was a ton of fun, and I was actually disappointed by the Dark Universal Universe, DUU, being canceled. It was at the moment of my favorite scene, when Tom Cruise is being manhandled by Russell Crowe, that I realized this is just Tom Cruise starring in a big-budget film as a Bruce Campbell character. Bruce's hapless characters survive, but are beaten to a pulp for their trouble. Plus, I like Tom Cruise playing a character set back on his heels a little bit. Mark Strong winner, Jake Johnson. So that's an agreement with your Mark Strong Award winner. And you know what? I really like the framing of that. He's just a big budget Bruce Campbell movie. I can kind of see it. I kind of wish it was Bruce Campbell instead. But, you know, Tom Cruise playing that character, certainly, as we acknowledged last week, it is interesting at the very least. Just kind of see him playing something a little bit different versus what you normally get from him these days.
I agree. It's the idea of Bruce Campbell in that movie though is very it's in my head now, and I'm mad it's not real. I'm just gonna have to settle for the old classic Bubba Hotep, which to be fair is Bruce Campbell starring in a movie with a mummy. So can't beggars can't be choosers. So we'll take what we get. But yeah, it's just like a giant big budget B movie in a lot of ways, and I think that's a good way to a fun way to look at it.
Thanks for writing in, Mike. But now we're talking about Godzilla, the reboot from the 90s. Andrew, you would consider this a reboot, right? I know we talked previously about how, you know, what's a remake, what's a reboot, what's a legacy sequel sometimes? Those lines get blurred, but like, this is the first American Godzilla movie. It's not like rebooting an American franchise, but it's certainly not a remake because it's not the same story from Gojira, from the original movie. And even the Toho movies, the original Japanese movies, themselves have rebooted and messed with the continuity a lot. So the fact that this one just happened to be made in America, does that qualify to consider it a reboot, you think?
I think so. Because they have done things, I believe, with the first and then the Return of Godzilla in the 80s. They did this thing where they kind of did the Power Rangers method with it, where they took a lot of the Japanese footage and then shot new sequences to kind of fit in to make it more palatable to American audiences. They did that a couple of times, but even that, like, that's, you know, they're not doing it from the ground up. They're doing it as that's just a kind of chopping it up to make it more, like you said, to make it more suitable for American audiences. And Japan, how it's treated Godzilla, and I'm sure mutual friend Doug will be screaming at us right now for how much I'm probably not getting this right. They have like kind of gone back and messed with the Godzilla timeline multiple times. Like there's the original Showa era of films from like 54 to 75. And that just got a big fancy Criterion set, or not just, it's been a while, but very nice set. All those movies and really cleaned them up. But in 84, they did a movie called The Return of Godzilla that like acted as a direct sequel to the original 1954 Godzilla. So a legacy sequel in a way. And then that kicked off a timeline called the Heisei era, which was 84 to 95. That was another timeline, using only the original film as the same jumping off point. And then even after this movie comes out, they do another series called the Millennium series or Millennium era, where basically every movie is a standalone sequel to the original Godzilla. That's kind of how it's approached. There's only a couple of them in that series that are meant to be sequels to each other. So Japan has played fast and loose with that continuity and with that idea of what's a sequel, what's a reboot, all of that a lot. And now we've even got stuff in the modern era like Shin Godzilla, which is just a straight Japanese reboot of Godzilla. Like that's not even using the first movie as a jumping off point. So this, I think, fits clearly as a reboot. It's not using any of the previous films as a basis outside maybe just thematic inspiration. Like it's not a sequel to any of them. Ultimately, I think that makes it a reboot. And it's a fully American production. It's from the ground up. It's an American movie. There's no splicing of footage. There's nothing like that. So yeah, to me, this is definitely a reboot, just an American reboot.
So would you say the 2014 Godzilla is a reboot of this franchise?
No.
A reboot of the 98 movie? Or a reboot of just
It's just another Godzilla reboot.
It's just another Godzilla reboot. That should be the name of a band. All right, well, let's jump into it, Andrew. This movie, the Godzilla movie specifically that we are talking about today, is the one that was released May 20th of 1998. The movie was made on a budget of $125 million at the box office. It brings in $379 million, which is well below expectations. They pumped a lot of money into this, a lot of marketing into this. They were looking for a giant summer blockbuster, and 379 is simply not cutting it. There were plans for future movies that were scrapped because of that box office. Not to mention, critically, the movie is not well received. It holds just a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. Man, I've said it before. Say it again. It is hard to get under 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. It seems to be happening more and more on our podcast as we cover these movies. I would say this is one of the lowest rated movies we've covered, and that's probably true. It's probably like the bottom third, but we're getting more and more of these movies that are really, really down there on that critic score.
We are, and this is not one that the audience score is particularly better on. I think it's just a 28%. So this is not a movie where the fans came running and defended it. It's not something that's been critically evaluated or reevaluated over time. This is just a movie that people did not like.
That is one way to put it for sure. Let's look at the creative team. The movie was written by Dean Devlin. Now, previously to this, he wrote Universal Soldier, starring the greatest actor of all time, Jean-Claude Van Damme, as well as Stargate and Independence Day. So very high-profile films, blockbuster movies. After this, sort of takes a break from writing, does a lot of producing, but does come back to write Independence Day Resurgence, and writes and directs Geostorm. Andrew, did you see Geostorm?
Once upon a time.
I've only seen the trailer, but that trailer is a work of art. That trailer, I mean this in the best way possible, looks like a parody of blockbuster filmmaking. It looks like they didn't actually make the movie. They just set out to make that trailer. It's got like every trope and cliche, and it's all played super serious about, I don't know, the world's destroying itself or whatever. But I love that trailer. I don't really have any interest in seeing the movie, but I love that trailer.
It was, I saw that trailer a lot because I go to the movies a lot, but it definitely felt like, it looked like something Roland Emmerich would have made, and they'd worked together a couple of times here. Independence Day, Godzilla, then he was a producer on some of his later movies. So it felt like he was just doing the Roland thing on his own, basically. And yeah, I saw it once upon a time just because I try to support Gerard Butler, but man, he makes it hard sometimes. But he hashtag PP. Much love, but maybe be a little bit more diligent.
Well, you mentioned Roland Emmerich, obviously a frequent collaborator with our writer here, because Roland directed just about every one of those movies I listed there: Universal Soldier, Stargate, Independence Day. Also directed The Patriot, The Day After Tomorrow, 10,000 BC, 2012, White House Down, and most recently, Moonfall. And there's a direct line between all of those movies. Like you get the big summer, I mean this respectfully, dumb fun type movies, right? I mean,
yeah.
There's a certain type of movie that this man directs. First of all, how funny is it that he directed 10,000 BC and the next movie he directed was 2012? That's fun.
This is very funny.
That's fun. I've seen a good amount of these. I enjoy them to varying degrees, but you know what you're going to get from Roland Emmerich. People often talk about Michael Bay as like the king of the big dumb action movie. I think Roland Emmerich gives them a run for its money. I don't think people are talking about Roland Emmerich's style enough. I mean, that's a pretty deep filmography.
I think Roland Emmerich's doing it before Michael Bay is, for the most part, too. I think Roland Emmerich kind of comes out the gate there with, like, Independence Day, Godzilla back-to-back, and kind of really establishes that kind of... I mean, do you think Independence Day is just an alien invasion movie? I mean, we've seen versions of that on film for 50 years at that point. And it was just a big, giant blockbuster version of it with a likable, relatively stacked cast. And it kind of set this weird template for a lot of what he would do. I actually just watched Moonfall the other day after I watched Godzilla, and I was kind of shocked that it really is just, it's Roland Emmerich doing Roland Emmerich stuff. And I was kind of, the man is, like you said, you kind of know what you're getting.
Yeah.
he has a formula, he sticks to it, and sometimes it works really well.
So that means our writer here, Dean Devlin, we can credit him for Bill Pullman's incredible speech in Independence Day that genuinely gets you fired up every single time.
Yeah, like well, Roland Emmerich's a co-writer on that movie, so maybe
okay. I wonder who wrote that specifically.
Yeah, just because I think we've talked about that. That speech feels like it's from a different movie.
Yeah, it's awesome. Good stuff. All right, well, let's talk about this specific blockbuster, Godzilla, 1998. After multiple reported sightings of a giant creature making its way through Central America and the Caribbean, the U.S. military enlists the help of Nick Tatopoulos, a biologist that specializes in studying the effect nuclear radiation has on animals. When the creature, now known to be a giant mutated lizard named Godzilla, arrives in New York City, it's up to Nick to learn as much as he can about the beast and devise a plan to destroy it before it can destroy the city. Simple, straightforward. Godzilla attacks, we gotta stop him, right?
Yep.
I left a lot out of that synopsis, though. There's a lot of...
There's a lot.
There's like 3 different groups of characters. There's Nick, and then there's the research team of the military, then the colonels of the military and his right-hand man, and then there's the politics and the mayor, and then there's his love interest that has the reporter and her group of friends. There's like there's a lot of moving parts. It's going to take a minute to go through this cast, but A to B storyline here is Godzilla's attacking. We got to figure out what's going on here. We got to stop him.
We do.
Before we talk about how we stop Godzilla, let's go through that cast. But of course, we're going to start with the high point, with the best casting and best performance of the film. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the Call of Duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Godzilla?
This was there were 2 that were kind of competing for me. Neither are necessarily our lead here, but after much consideration, I'm going with Jean Reno as Philippe Roche. He's I don't know if I'd necessarily go as far as to say he's the only one who understands the assignment, but he's definitely playing this with equal parts seriousness, but also the levity that kind of comes with being in a giant monster movie. He has genuine through lines of his character that are just complaining about how bad American coffee is, while he's trying to plot to figure out how to defeat Godzilla, because it turns out he has a vested interest in the history of Godzilla remaining unknown, because he is French. Do I?
Because he's French, he feels perfectly responsible.
Well, in the movie, it is established that Godzilla is an iguana that got mutated due to nuclear fallout in French Polynesia. So as such, he has a vested interest. Him and his whole team have a vested interest in making sure that France's involvement in the creation of Godzilla is essentially left unknown. And so he ends up he destroys a lot of the evidence along the way too, because he doesn't want anybody taking pictures or photos or anything. He's really trying to keep this as minimal as possible. But his character is really fun. He's got some genuinely funny gags that I thought that genuinely made me laugh. And he seems to just be having a blast this whole movie. So that is who I'm going with. And it's Jean Reno. He's great in almost everything he does. Professional, Mission Impossible. Whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, the dude's always seems like he's having a blast. So I'm into it.
Andrew, I agree with you 100%. My Mark Strong Award is also going to Jean Reno. The dude kills it in everything that he's in, and you can put him in anything. I mean, Leon the Professional, or whatever version you want to call that movie, is probably most people's first exposure to him, at least in the 90s. Excellent movie. He is just so good in it. But he can do something like that, which is super serious and a bit dark at times. And then you can drop him into Mission Impossible, where he's like a bit of a double agent and a fun action movie. You can drop him in here into Godzilla, which is, as we said, big, dumb summer blockbuster. And he fits in just fine. The dude can do anything. And incredibly, he's kind of typecast because he's always, he's got the accent. He's always going to be like, quote unquote, the foreign guy to some degree. But his character here is nothing like his character in Leon the Professional, right? I mean,
No.
there's a lot of range within that kind of box that he gets put into sometimes in American movies. And the dude kills it. I think he genuinely elevates every movie that he's in. So easy, Mark Strong, award winner going out to Jean Reno. Very well deserved. But as we said, there's a lot of people to go through here. Let's go ahead and head to the top of the call sheet here. Matthew Broderick as Nick Totopoulos.
Totopoulos.
Of course. Matthew Broderick, someone that everyone knows. Huge star in the 80s and 90s. Of course, with Ferris Bueller's Day Off, probably most people's first exposure to him. But again, talking about range, is also in Glory, a very serious Civil War film. The Lion King, The Cable Guy. I mean, come on. The dude's got credits coming out his ears here.
Hey, fun fact,
knows...
Chris.
Yes, Andrew.
Did you know that Jean Reno is Mufasa in the French dub of The Lion King?
What? No, I did not know that.
And he also reprised that role in the live-action remake, just like James Earl Jones did.
Oh, so he's also the French Mufasa for both.
Because James Earl Jones did it in both, right? Yes,
yeah, he did. Yeah, he came back.
So yeah, Jean Reno did the same. So didn't even catch on our Lion King connection there, but there you go. Fun fact.
Yeah, look at that. Jean Reno is Matthew Broderick's dad.
In France only.
Andrew, do you know that Jackie Chan plays Beast in Beauty and the Beast for the Mandarin version?
No kidding.
Yeah. The dude's like a classically trained singer, so he does all the songs and everything.
I need that soundtrack.
Yeah.
I would like to get this soundtrack. I would like to own it.
Yeah, that's fun. Anyway, Matthew Broderick. I mean, I don't know. What is there to say about Matthew Broderick? It's crazy. You can list off these credits. These are huge movies that I'm throwing out there. I mean, Inspector Gadget, big movies. Godzilla, big movies this guy was in. But
yep.
No one really thinks of him as like a blockbuster actor or even a big name actor. He's just that guy that everyone knows, and you know what you're going to get from Matthew Broderick. And I will say, #PP, I think in some of his roles, some of these other movies, he can get a little bit miscast, but I think he's cast very well in Godzilla. I think he's super believable as this slightly awkward, obsessed with his job biologist that gets thrown in a situation. I think it's pretty good casting here. And Andrew, that hat that he wears, iconic fashion of the 90s.
That hat is doing some heavy lifting.
Yes.
No, I agree. I think like even and that's not to say he's typecast or that he can only do one type of thing. Like I think his performance in like Election is actually like really, really good, where he's just kind of like he's got the appearance on every level of being that teacher that everybody likes, but yet there's that undercurrent of that sinister undercurrent, if I may, that kind of runs throughout that and leads to him making some bad decisions. But yeah, he's as the lead here, he's perfect for that role. That kind of a little meek, a little kind of obviously very confused at what's happening around him, but I think he hits that perfectly. So yeah, I do actually think that he's very well cast as our lead here.
Maria Patillo plays Audrey Timmons. Lots of credits to her name, pops up bit parts in movies like Chaplin, True Romance, and Natural Born Killers. These days is retired, enjoying her best life, I'm sure, with her family. But like I said, in her heyday, certainly was cast in a lot of movies, including our movie here, Godzilla, where she is Matthew Broderick's love interest. It's a bit of they have history from before the movie. They got a will they, won't they thing going out. There's a big dramatic kiss towards the end of it. And she is a aspiring reporter. She could have played April O'Neil. There's certainly scenes where you see her like putting her hair up and doing her reporting where it, got those April O'Neil vibes, but good stuff from Maria. Yeah,
she's basically her and Nick are former kind of college sweethearts, and they kind of run into each other, not necessarily by chance, but she sees he's involved with this situation and uses that as an opportunity to try to use her reporting credentials to help herself in the process. And she does a bad thing early on, but she makes up for it. And that's really what it's all about. It's about growing and being better. And that's a lesson we can all learn at this point in our lives, isn't it? But
that's the biggest moral of Godzilla, yeah.
Yeah, be better. This PSA brought to you by Best of the Rest. But yeah, she's I think she's pretty well cast here. Like I said, got the April O'Neil vibes for sure. But yeah, coming in and adding to our relatively stacked cast here.
Yeah, speaking of stacked cast, we have a Best of the Rest alum here. Hank Azaria plays Animal. He doesn't play an animal, that's the character's nickname, it's what they call him. But he is a cameraman at the news station that Audrey works for. So he's one of her friends along with his wife. The trio are usually together throughout the movie trying to get the scoop on the whole Godzilla story. And it's Hank Azaria. I love this man. I love him in everything that he's in. Probably ultimately got to say most known for The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah.
Not the only Simpsons voice actor that's in this movie. Oddly, there's a few of them, but most known for doing like 50% of the voices you hear on The Simpsons. But anytime he pops up in an acting role, Mystery Men is one we talked about on the podcast previously. I love it. The dude can do so much with his voice and play so many different characters. Here, his character is New Yorker. They're hitting that note hard.
That's basically it.
He's got a line towards the end there where they're tracking down Godzilla, and he comes across Madison Square Gardens all torn to crap, and he's like, "Oh, they messed with the garden? Now I'm mad."
Yeah, he's great. I mean, and it's so weird to like look back at his like 90s filmography to just see the things that like he's randomly in. Like he's in Pretty Woman, he's in Quiz Show, he's in Heat. Like he's in like these like strange places that you never would have expected him to be, because he's kind of got this like comedic sense about him, but he's done these tons of serious things or been dropped into serious roles, and he crushes it every time. I mean, I'm never sad to see Hank Azaria on my screen, and this movie is no exception.
Kevin Dunn plays Colonel Hicks. This is the main colonel of the U.S. Army that is trying to stop Godzilla. It's we've seen this role plenty of times in plenty of monster movies. You know, his job is to get angry and say things like, "Give him everything we've got." And Kevin Dunn is perfect for doing that. You've got to get the right guy in that role that can pull it off and do it believably, and he can do that. Like, you couldn't cast Matthew Broderick in this role. It would make no sense.
No.
But Kevin Dunn, I believe it. He looks like could be a hard ass and yell at people and get things done and get angry, and he probably has high blood pressure. He pulls it off. You can see all that in his performance. Journeyman actor, been in a million things. Yeah. Hot Shots, Stir of Echoes, Warrior, Small Soldiers, the greatest movie of all time. So The dude's everywhere, always crushing it, no matter how small his reporting role is, and this is no exception.
Yeah, he's the guy that you've almost assuredly seen him in something. Like, he's that guy, you know his face. You have absolutely seen a movie this guy is in. Had a big recurring role for a while as Sam Witwicky's father in the Transformers films, where his job was basically to stand around and act incredulous every time Transformers showed up, even after multiple movies. You're like, you should be used to this by now, dude. But yeah, you've seen him in something for sure, and he's perfect for exactly what he needs to do here.
Harry Shearer plays Charles Kamen, and this dude came in just a total sleaze, such a sleazeball.
Oh my god,
just the worst and everything.
The worst.
He's the main reporter where Maria's character works, Audrey works, and he kind of hogs all the stories, and he's total womanizer, just very open about the sleazy things that he says. Just total sleaze, yeah. And Harry Shearer, he plays it very well. He is very believable. He plays this role. You want to punch this guy in the face. He's very good at doing that. This is another Simpsons voice actor. Voices a ton of characters on The Simpsons. Yeah. The Burns.
The Burns.
The Burns. Mr. Burns, maybe the biggest one, but there's tons of supporting characters.
Flanders,
voiced
probably his
by
other big
Harry.
one.
Oh, yeah, there you go. But
He
yeah,
does
I mean,
Burns and Smithers. I always thought that was hilarious. Just to imagine Harry Shearer just yelling back and forth at himself, basically.
flirting with himself.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good. You want to punch him in the face with this performance here, which means he's doing a good job.
He is obviously deeply insecure. Like he's very much like does everything he can to try to protect his spot. Very, very, very Hulk Hogan in that sense. Both balding too. But like at one point they put him next to this female co-anchor who's like markedly taller than him, and he's like, "Can I get at something?" And he just like holds himself up so he doesn't look shorter. He steals her story because it's got a whole bunch of new information, and so he's one of those guys protecting his spot, and you absolutely loathe this man. But like you said, his credits speak for them. I mean, stuff, even Spinal Tap. Like, God, I forget sometimes that he's in Spinal Tap just because he's done so much else since then. But yeah, he's fantastic, and he is absolutely believable in this role.
Arabella Field plays Lucy Pilati. This is Animal's wife, and she's a lot of fun, usually yelling at Animal. But before we talk about performance, her name is Arabella. Arabella Field. That's a cool name. It's like Annabella, but an R instead of an N. Arabella. I've never seen that before. I like that. I didn't recognize a lot of her other credits. I did see that she's a National Treasure, a movie I still haven't seen, but I know that you love that movie. Do you know who she plays in National Treasure? Is it a significant role there?
No.
Okay. Well,
absolutely not. It is. I did not even know she was in it. She plays. Let me find out. Yes, she plays somebody's secretary, so she is in probably 1, maybe 2 scenes.
Okay. Well, out there doing her thing. God bless her.
Sure.
I like her here. I like her in Hank Azaria's chemistry, and their back and forth. It's a lot of fun. Again, another New Yorker. Just being a New Yorker. Got those New Yorker type lines. Good stuff.
Yeah. She, that's basically her, and Hank Azaria's role is to be New Yorkers. Although maybe they live in Jersey. I don't remember. I'm sure the New York fans of our show are going to be very upset that we confused people from New Jersey.
I mean,
with people
he
from
loves
New York,
Madison Square Garden. That means he loves the Knicks. That means he lives in New York.
That means so of course, obviously. Yeah. There could be no mistake otherwise.
Yes.
But yeah.
I'm New York in here.
Yeah, so otherwise, that's gotta be, but yeah, that's her role here. She reacts really to Animal's antics and tries to be mad at him for doing dangerous, reckless things. And it's fun.
Vicki Lewis plays Dr. Elise Chapman. She is on the sort of team of scientists that the military recruits to try to figure out what's going on with Godzilla. So she works closely with Matthew Broderick's character, Nick, and very clearly is into him. Drops these kind of like signs that she likes him that go unrequited because he is caught up on his former lover, Andre. But Andrew, hot take. I think Nick should have ended up with Vicky. Did you feel that too?
Absolutely.
Because Audrey, I mean, she leaves him before the events of this movie. He proposes and she just vanishes. And then when they meet up, she doesn't say I'm sorry. She's like, hey, people grow. And he just moves past it and then screws him over again. What's going on? And then
I wasn't happy with the glossing over of that situation.
Yes.
I was not happy.
Yes. People do grow, but you also got to take responsibility and own up to what you did and move past it and acknowledge that you've hurt someone else. Anyway, I like Vicky. I wish it would have.
Who apologizes to him, though? Vicki Lewis does.
That's right. That's right. She cares about it.
She apologizes for something she doesn't even do. It's not her fault. She apologizes anyway. Hashtag, it should have been Vicki Lewis.
Give me the Vicky cut. Is there a version of this movie where they have a dramatic kiss in the end? Instead of her kissing version. A random cameraman?
Can we get the AI on that? Instead of you guys making weird Chris Farley Joker pictures, can we get this version of this movie instead?
Bruce Campbell in The Mummy, and Vicki Lewis ending up with Nick Totopoulos.
Oh, hey, you got it right.
Get on it. Get on it, nerds. Outside of Godzilla, she's probably most known for News Radio, pretty popular sitcom from the 90s. But all jokes aside.
It had the greatest actor of all time, so yes, it was.
I know you don't mean Joe Rogan. I know you
Absolutely
don't
not.
mean Andy Dick. Who is the greatest actor of all time in News Radio?
Phil Hartman.
Phil Hartman. Okay.
Good times.
Yes. Andrew, anything else you want to say about Vicky other than she should have ended up with Nick?
No, she's another one that you've probably seen somewhere before. Like, I remember her showing, like, she's shown up on, like, still shows up on television shows. I remember her from an episode of Angie Tribeca. I remember her on some episodes of How I Met Your Mother. She showed up she was a voice on Rugrats, The Wild Thornberrys. She's been literally everywhere, and has been around for a long time. And like I said, still out there doing her stuff. And now I'm mad the movie doesn't end that way.
That takes us through our main players. Like I said, it's a deep cast. There's plenty of other people we can touch on. I'm going to bring up 3 really quick that kind of have smaller roles that I think have significant enough that we need to mention them. First off, Nancy Cartwright plays Cayman's secretary. She's not in it a lot. Maybe 1, maybe 2 scenes. I'm not sure if she has any lines, but I'm bringing it up because she voices Bart on The Simpsons. It's our 3rd Simpsons voice actor, and I'm really not even sure how that happened. Like, did they hire Hank Azaria, and he's like, hey, I know a guy, and they hire Harry Shearer, he's like, oh, hey, I know a girl, and they kind of helped each other get cast. I'm not really sure how it happened.
I don't know.
It's fun. Weird legacy of this movie. Speaking of fun, Michael Lerner plays Andrew. He plays Mayor Ebert. Not even subtle. The mayor of New York in this movie is a Roger Ebert lookalike, so much that they name him Mayor Ebert, and he's bumbling and making the wrong calls all the time. It's clearly like a shot at Roger Ebert, who isn't the biggest fan of other Roland Emmerich movies. So I think this was lighthearted. Like, I don't think they're really trying to like go hard at him or anything.
Yeah.
And then he even has like a right-hand man in his office that looks like Gene Siskel. So it's very clearly a Ebert and Siskel joke. And Ebert and Siskel themselves commented on it. They did not like Godzilla, did not give it a thumbs up, but they thought it was kind of funny. They had those lookalikes and actually went as far as to say they wish they would have gotten squashed or eaten by Godzilla. Why put them in the movie if they're not going to get killed by Godzilla? They don't. But Mayor of New York is Roger Ebert lookalike.
That's pretty funny. What's your 3rd call out?
Frank Welker, of course. He does just credited as creature effects. I gotta think this is mostly the baby Godzillas. If I had to guess where his voice is coming up, because the big Godzilla, they use some of like the original roar is in there, which isn't produced by a human, and some other stuff mixed in there. Maybe some Frank Welker mixed in there, but definitely the raptor-like babies. I think that's where you're getting your Frank Welker.
And our 4th Simpsons alum.
Oh, yeah. Does he do like a voice or does he do like sounds for The Simpsons?
He does Santa's Little Helper.
Of course. Of course. Man, what a friggin' career that guy has. This is probably, like, no joke, his 10th time we've mentioned him on our show. Dude's in everything.
He's in everything. Like, he's genuinely like, they're like, we need some like weird non-human sounds. Call Frank Welker. It's fine. Like, it's just like genuinely like he's on people's speed dial for like, can you just like say some weird crap into the phone and we can record it? And I guarantee you he can do it. It's like, there's this guy that, there was a guy who said once, there's a comic book writer, his name is Mark Waid. And some guy said, he's like, I bet you could call Mark Waid in the dead of night and ask him for a script for an issue of Superman. And he could like dictate it to you over the phone and go right back to sleep. I guarantee Frank Welker's exactly the same way with like anything. Somebody's like, can you give us some weird dinosaur non-human sound? And he just sits for a second and then just makes a noise. And they're like, perfect. Got it. Thanks. And then they're just gone. Like, his phone's just tapped all the time so that they just record the weird things he says.
Not to get like dark or morbid or anything, but like Frank Welker, he's getting up there in age. God bless him. Hope he lives a long, long time and he's living his best life. But at some point, the man's going to move on, whether he retires or passes on. How is Hollywood going to replace this man? It's going to take like 20 voice actors to come up with the ridiculous noises and sounds that this man does. It's crazy.
it's so weird to think about the stuff that like he's still like doing, because like he's still playing Fred Jones on Scooby-Doo. He has been playing Fred Jones on Scooby-Doo since that show started. And I don't know if you guys know this, but Scooby-Doo Where Are You debuted in 1969. He has been playing that character for 53 years. And he still sounds young, and he's not one of those people that sound
like how do you do that? Like, new Scooby-Doo doesn't have like an old grizzled
like
Freddy.
It's like when they finally did animated Batman movies with Adam West and Burt Ward in like 2014, I was kind of like, why didn't you do this 20 years ago?
Yes.
But one of the things that always kind of knocks them down just a notch for me is you can absolutely tell that Adam West and Burt Ward are really old when they're recording it. You can like just tell. It's in the delivery, it's in their voices. It's just notable. But just,
I mean, you don't think that adds to the charm a little bit? Because it's
a little
actually
bit.
them.
They're still extremely fun. That Batman and Return of the Cape Crusaders was the best movie Batman was in the year that it came out. And there was like 3 movies Batman was in that year. But yeah, I don't know how Frank Welker does it, but like the fact that he's still playing Fred like today with no issues. And it's gonna be interesting what happens, because it's similar to like when Casey Kasem died. Like Casey Kasem was Shaggy for a long time, and then like Matthew Lillard has like randomly like just took the live action role to voice at one point, and just took over Shaggy at some point. And it's been nobody's like, oh, not my Shaggy, no hashtag not my Shaggy type stuff.
No.
But
although for some reason for Scoob, they didn't bring in Matthew Lillard. They gave it to Will Forte, which I love. Will Forte, legitimately probably my favorite comedic actor out there. But like, come on, man, give it to Matthew Lillard. It's like his thing. He even like he went
Frank
on Twitter,
Welker.
He was like, "This is how I find out that I'm not playing Shaggy." It was kind of a bummer.
Well, yeah, because Frank Welker, I think, is the only
OG
current. He's the only person that was voicing them in cartoons at the time that was used for that movie. So like, Will Forte was Shaggy, and then I don't think any of the other originals are in that. I think the rest of it is all just other. Or no, because Zac Efron was Fred, Amanda Seyfried was Daphne. So they did the we're getting an A-list cast thing for that. But I'm glad Frank Welker got to keep playing Scooby-Doo, not a role he originated, but took over after Don
Frank
Messick
Welker
died.
does Scooby-Doo? I thought you said Frank Welker does Fred.
He does both now.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So in Scoob,
we got to spend 20 more minutes talking about Scooby-Doo, Andrew. In Scoob, he gets to continue to be Scooby, but not Fred. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. He plays Scooby, but Fred is played by Zac Efron.
Got it.
Because but like I said, that is not a role that Frank Welker originated on Scooby-Doo Where Are You? That was Don Messick. And a couple of people have done it differently over the years, but Frank Welker has been doing it consistently since 2002, but also slightly in 1979. But yeah,
I love the idea of Frank Welker has been doing Fred all along, and then they're like, all right, we need a new Scoob. We need someone who can do dog noises, and Frank Welker just like
they take Don Messick dies in like 96, so it's just like they spend too long just being like, well, I guess Frank Welker can do it. My God, it's that's so weird because. I mean, Don Messick does it until like the mid 90s. So there's not that long of a gap between when he dies and when Frank Welker takes over. But yeah, Frank Welker he's the man. He's a guy that like, if he does a convention, like a Transformers convention or something, I think I would have to go meet Frank Welker just because he could sign probably.
I make this joke all the time about, I make this joke all the time about, how long someone's line is at a convention because they're in 2 or 3 or 4 different franchises. He's in every franchise, major franchise. You've got Frank Welker memorabilia. You can have him sign.
I mean, we literally just established, like, just through the course of this, that he's got Transformers, he's got Godzilla, he's got The Simpsons, he's got Scooby-Doo, alone.
He played the
and-
X's and O's and Little Giants, for crying out loud.
My God, seriously? Oh my God. That is absolutely insane. And he's done everything. He could quite literally do everything. Frank Welker could probably impersonate my voice and sound more like me than I do.
Yes. All right. That's been the Frank Welker Hour. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be here
All right, guys.
next time. All right. No,
Bye.
we're talking about a movie here, Andrew. Godzilla.
Yes.
And we've gone through the cast. So that means it's time to talk about the scenes of this film, specifically the best scenes, starting with our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in Godzilla?
I am going to go with the scene from which your intro line came from, the Great Fish Heist, as it's called. I think this is a good showcase of what they're trying to do with this Godzilla. So what they're trying to do at this point is lure him out so that they can try and kill him, basically. You know, keeping it light. But they're trying to kill Godzilla.
Yeah.
So they have all the fish out there. It's a giant ton of fish. It smelled gross sitting on my couch. Like it was just not a thing that I wanted to be around. But so Nick obviously realizes that like the smell is not getting through, is not wafting around enough, and then realizes that the sewers are apparently part of getting this to Godzilla, before kind of inadvertently finding out that Godzilla is basically just like tunneling through the subway systems and staying underground, and that's part of how he's staying hidden. Is he's just using the natural tunnels within the city to his advantage to stay hidden. This ultimately results in him appearing. He takes up all the fish, and we get a big blockbuster action sequence of them trying to pursue and take out Godzilla. We get a ton of different set pieces here that get to do a bunch of different stuff. They kind of, again, they're showing that this Godzilla can kind of, first off, he's fast. Japanese Godzilla is typically, he's coming, and you typically have plenty of time to get out of the way. Japanese Godzilla is very much the steamroller from Austin Powers. It's like, stop! No, you got plenty of time to get out of the way. Just don't be there when he's doing his thing, because it's not going to end well for you. But this one moves fast. He's quick. He's agile. He can hide. He disappears. There's multiple times in this sequence where they lose sight of Godzilla, which is insane to think about. Like the idea that you would just miss a giant mutated iguana. But
he's just standing next to a building with like Groucho Marx glasses and a fedora on. And...
he's just like leaned up against the side of the building, and he's like, they can't see me. But yeah, I think this is a really good sequence that we get a little bit of Nick's knowledge, which is proving important throughout the whole movie, because they're very quick to kind of dismiss him at a lot of times. They bring him in and then don't listen to any of his advice, which, classic. But this is kind of a big instance where he gets to kind of show that he knows what he's talking about. And like I said, we get a big old giant action sequence with the military chasing Godzilla. This is kind of a hallmark of Godzilla films at this point. Plenty of Godzilla films basically boil down to the military versus Godzilla. And this is a good example of that. So that's what I'm going with. That's when I think the movie is firing on all cylinders.
Andrew, good call. Good call on the scene. This comes shortly after like Godzilla's first time in New York, which ends up being the only time we get Godzilla in a populated city, funny enough, because they evacuate it suspiciously fast, I might say. It takes a long time to evacuate a city. But that's when they start trying to hatch the plan for catching him, and Nick's trying to kind of figure out, why did Godzilla choose New York? What's it thinking? What's it after? And he has just this wonderful line. Well, of course he chose New York. It's an island, water on all sides.
And that's it.
In case you don't know what an island is. Reminds me so much of experts tell me it's a pyramid. But
It's a pyramid.
He gets
in
the
Egypt.
idea. Gets the idea to get all the fish together to lure out Godzilla, and by golly, it works. It just turns out that our mere mortal weapons do not bring this thing down. Another hallmark of Godzilla being an indestructible monster that our weapons are useless against. But this comes pretty early in the movie. One of my notes here in the section says this movie is trucking. Not even at an hour yet. It's like 40 minutes. We get Godzilla rampaging through the city and then them trying to catch him. This is what I was talking about. Like, in my mind, this is leading to the end of the movie. They've got the fish trap set up. I thought we were like wrapping up to the finale, but we're not even halfway through the damn movie. There is a moment when Godzilla, it's a little unclear, breathes fire. He does it twice in this movie, but both times they make it a point to show like a car exploding and possibly igniting his... I don't know if Godzilla actually breathes fire in this movie or if, I don't know, he breathes gas that gets ignited. I'm not sure what they're conveying there, but regardless,
Right.
fire goes through the streets of New York, and it's a pretty cool visual. The as they're trying to destroy Godzilla, they accidentally destroy the Chrysler Building. Because, you know, so big dumb action movies, Roland Emmerich movies, you've got to destroy landmarks. That's what you do.
Of course.
My
You can't
note also
destroy the
says-
Empire State Building, though. You can go with the Chrysler
No.
Building, but not the Empire State.
That one's taken. That's a King Kong thing. You got to make your own stamp.
Ironically enough, in Moonfall, the Chrysler Building also gets destroyed.
Oh, really? Roland Emmerich hates the Chrysler Building.
Yes.
Confirmed.
You heard it here first.
My note also says chasing Godzilla through the building maze is full-on video game mode.
Yep.
As Godzilla, he's literally running through a maze of buildings. I do not believe this is an accurate representation of New York at that point. All the buildings are taller than Godzilla, and it's literally like a maze, and the walls are made of buildings. But, you know, you're not supposed to be thinking about that too much. But the helicopter's chasing him. It's a fun little sequence there, and Godzilla hiding, sneaking up on him, taking him out, eating one of them from underneath. It's good stuff. It's good, dumb, fun. It's I think it's what you're expecting when you go into a American Godzilla movie in the 90s.
I agree.
And at the end of the scene, I do like one of the soldiers. They feel hopeless about it, and he tells Nick, he said, he did all of this, and we did nothing to him. And Nick says, oh, that's not true. We fed him. It's a good one, Nick. Good pick, Andrew. Not what I highlighted as my favorite scene of the movie, but certainly worthy and probably the best Godzilla scene in the film. But for me, the movie is most fun at a scene that doesn't even involve Godzilla. That's right. I'm going to go with the Madison Square Garden sequence with all the baby Godzillas. Because, on the one hand, you might think it's kind of silly that a good third of this damn movie is dedicated to baby Godzillas instead of Godzilla himself. But put that aside and enjoy the scene for what it is. And there's a lot of fun gags here, and I think it's pretty cool. I will say, one of my notes simply says, oh, we fool Jurassic Park now. Because these baby Godzillas are raptors. They sound like raptors from Jurassic Park. They move like the raptors from Jurassic Park. That's clearly the inspiration here. But you know what? That's fine. And it all takes place in Madison Square Garden, which is really cool. It's like this dilapidated Madison Square Garden that's been crumbled by Godzilla, and the arena floor is full of these eggs, these giant eggs that our characters are walking around in. And they try to blow them up. They don't have enough explosives for how many eggs they are. Then, Andrew, the eggs start hatching, and these newborn lizard creatures emerge, and they're covered in their egg goo. And I've just got to ask, imagine the smell of Madison Square Garden during this scene.
Where's that goo come from, Chris?
No one knows. No, it's good though. I like all the gags of them like running from these baby Godzillas, that are actually, raptors. At one point, he home alones them. He spills like gumballs on the ground, and they all go sliding across the hallway as they run across the gumballs. Like, man, dumb, goofy fun that I think those scenes in this movie work. It's just popcorn fun. Speaking of popcorn, you've also got the scene here where they're going in the elevator, and it stops at one floor and opens up, and there's just a bunch of baby Godzillas eating popcorn, and they look at him, and he goes, oh, wrong floor, and then he keeps going. It's stupid, but it's fun, Andrew. It works. For me.
Yeah.
So even though this is probably for like die-hard Godzilla fans, this is maybe the most like sacrilegious part of the movie.
Oh yeah.
I do think it's the most fun. You divorce it from what it means to be a Godzilla movie or whatever. I'm having a lot of fun in this scene, and there's a few 90s isms here that I want to highlight. There's very prominent blockbuster signs throughout Madison Square Garden, and it's not there as a joke. It's there because Blockbuster was still a big deal in 1998, which is pretty funny. There is a moment where they're trying to get a signal out, and Audrey realizes that, they broadcast Ranger games from here, and she says, the network is on an internet. That's a line in this movie. On an internet. One of those internets.
Did they say internet or did they say intranet, Chris?
For the sake of my joke and my note and me making a point here, I'm going to say they said an internet.
All right, that's fine.
But also, they send that signal out, and then the guy at the station that's responsible for receiving the signal, mind you, this is in the middle of like a monster destroying the city. And he sees a signal coming from Madison Square Garden, and his response is, hey, there's no Ranger game on tonight.
Look around you, bro.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say here about this scene, because they do get the message out. They do the report. They expose that there's a whole horde of Godzillas that are going to get out there. They can take over the world because they can just lay more and more eggs. Andrew, I know this is a bit against #PP, but Matthew Broderick deserves an Oscar for being able to deliver this line with a straight face. He says, each one of these amazing reptiles are born pregnant.
How does he know that?
#PP. The smell, Andrew. You can tell if I don't know. I don't know how he knows that. But Andrew, that's my favorite scene. There's just a lot of big, dumb, fun stuff there. It all works. Some would say maybe it works for the wrong reasons. It shouldn't be the movie at all. But there's a shot of one of the basketball hoops, and it's got a fish inside the hoop. Andrew, it's got a fish flapping in the hoop. That's fun. That's fun stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is a fun scene. It was definitely something that crossed my mind, but yeah, it's probably, like you said, it's the most sacrilegious to longtime Godzilla fans. But it's definitely, it's in effect well, it's not even the climax of our film because the movie keeps going after this.
This 40 minutes after this. It's crazy.
This is because
this is our false climax because they destroy Madison Square Garden. There's a big dramatic kiss between our hero and his love interest, and then Godzilla reemerges, and you got a big long sequence. So, like, it wants you to feel like it's the climax, but yeah, it's far from it.
Well, because at this point, your assumption is that Godzilla has already been dispatched. Right. They have led you to believe that. Now, any adept viewer is probably going to be like, I bet he's not, and you would be correct. But But yeah, it's a very fun sequence. But yeah, this is by no means they blow up Madison Square Garden, and it's not the end of the movie. That's this movie in a nutshell for you.
Got a bridge to blow up still. I will say this is my favorite scene, but it ends. Qualifying as my favorite scene ends when they escape Madison Square Garden, because what happens next is not my favorite part of the movie. Because they blow up Madison Square Garden, they destroy all the baby Godzillas, which, if that's not sad enough, Godzilla emerges, and Godzilla looks at her dead babies on the ground, and they linger on this moment, and Godzilla, like, nuzzles it with its nose, and it sees that it's lifeless. Andrew, that's really sad.
It's very sad.
I was like, y'all didn't have to. We get what happened. You don't have to, like, explicitly show us. My God.
I agree. That's one of those things where I was like, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to make me feel things here. I don't like it.
Now I want Godzilla to win.
Yeah. Screw you guys.
We got a lot of messages in about this movie. We told our Discord that we've got a reboot month coming up, and people were quick to pipe up with say, "Hey, how about that Godzilla movie?" For example, Bob Backwards in our Discord. Now, this is the one and only Bob Buell, the sweetheart of podcasting, friend of the show, been on our show multiple times. Here's their hot take, Andrew. Are you ready? Bob says, "I maintain that the late 90s Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie is okay." There you go. Some positivity from Bob. Thanks, Bob. Mike Lynch responded to that and said, "We've got the cast of The Simpsons. What could go wrong?" That's true. They got the cast of The Simpsons. Now, we also have a message in our Discord from Dr. Douglas. Now, this is the screen name of mutual friend Doug that we mentioned earlier. And the reason Doug comes to mind when we talk about Godzilla is because Doug is a huge Godzilla fan. No joke, the biggest Godzilla fan I know. He's got a prominent Godzilla tattoo on his arm and more Godzilla toys and collectibles than you can count. Dude loves Godzilla. So I'm curious what his positive thoughts are on the American adaptation, which is famously not well received by fans of the series. So Dr. Douglas writes, "Admittedly, I haven't watched it in a while, but the movie's biggest flaw is the name. The film's creature just doesn't live up to the name Godzilla. No atomic heat ray, he's running from the military and getting killed by conventional missiles from a jet. Blasphemy. But, on the positive side, if you just take away the title and expectations brought on by the Godzilla brand, you really do get an enjoyable and fun popcorn flick. Yeah, it's a Jurassic Park ripoff, but some ripoffs are great. Prove to me on paper that Street Sharks and Battletoads don't reek of badassery, and I'll kick your ass." His words. No, they're not as great as the Ninja Turtles, but they still rock. Thanks, Doug. Interesting perspective. I mean, obviously, we established he's a big Godzilla fan. This movie just ain't Godzilla to him. That's fine. That's I will say that's understandable compared to those older movies, but you take that away and you have a lot of fun. That's kind of what I was saying about the Madison Square Garden sequence. Like, yeah, this isn't really Godzilla, but it's fun. It's slapsticky. It's big budget action affair with plenty of jokes that land.
But practical effects there too. Godzilla's mostly CGI, but we get some practical stuff there with the baby Godzillas, which I like.
Oh boy, is Godzilla CGI. More CGI than I remembered. It's kind of like, I think I mentioned on another episode that anytime I think of the Power Rangers movie from the 90s, I think of their Zords looking really good. But anytime I go back and actually watch it with my eyeballs, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That looks a little rough.
What else would you watch it with, Chris?
My mind, my memories. It looks great there. But the CGI Godzilla, I mean, it's the best 1998 could offer, but hasn't aged that well. And most of the time, our big Godzilla is CG. There are a few times later in the movie we see a close-up of its face, and I do believe that is a practical Godzilla, and you can tell because it looks really good. But those baby Godzillas, a lot of practical stuff. I probably just leftover raptor stuff from the Jurassic Park movies, but hey, it works. It looks good. So that's interesting framing, to just kind of admit, hey, this is a Jurassic Park ripoff. It's monsters, dinosaurs running loose in a city.
Well, and I
Andrew,
think. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is this a better example of dinosaurs in a city than Jurassic Park: The Lost World?
I think The Lost World looks better.
Okay, but the marketing of that movie was there's a T-Rex in the city.
And it's 10 minutes of the movie.
It doesn't really deliver on that.
In that regard, yes. I would think because if you're going to do dinosaurs in a city, you should kind of go hardcore with it. But I think what Doug touches on there, though, is a common thing for a lot of people with this movie. And it's that it just doesn't feel like Godzilla to them. Just that idea that this creature, which was completely redesigned for this, there is a Stan Winston Godzilla design that exists, and it's just a riff on the classic Godzilla. It would have been very much in line with what you expected and saw from Godzilla before. But when Emmerich came on, that was when he was like, I want to completely redo this and he just didn't really want to do it that way. And kind of came up with this new kind of iguana-inspired design, because what he wanted was a Godzilla that could run. Like, that was actually something Emmerich wanted, was a Godzilla that was agile and fast and could move. And the original Godzilla just doesn't do that, really. He kind of, like I said, very deliberate walk with the original Godzilla, where you know where he's going. And some of the hallmark, like I said, the breath thing is a very kind of it's a very vague thing in this movie. His breath ignites twice, but Godzilla's atomic breath is also kind of like his thing, and that's kind of like his biggest power. And so to kind of have that missing created this very kind of weird, I think, dissonance between like what people saw Godzilla as and what this movie was. But I think when you do kind of just view this movie as its own thing, which is eventually what Japan did, I think there's some fun to be had.
Yeah, so speaking of Japan, they've acknowledged this movie's existence in the form of this creature that we see in this movie gets rebranded simply as Zilla, and does appear in Japanese Godzilla films, and it's very clear what they think of it.
What they think of it.
They establish, they're like, what about that creature in New York? Oh yeah, that's a totally different creature. They establish that it's not really Godzilla. And then whenever it fights other monsters, it gets its ass kicked. So it's pretty fun the way they canonize it, but again, make it very clear that like, that's not Godzilla.
The most notable example of what you're talking about comes in 2004's Godzilla Final Wars, where Godzilla's kind of being kind of just matched up with a lot of his most classic villains, Rodan, Ghidorah, King Caesar, a bunch of them. And at one point, he has a fight with Zilla, the aforementioned Godzilla of this movie, and Godzilla defeats him in about 10 seconds. So it's like Zilla jumps over him, Godzilla turns around and blasts him with his atomic breath, and that's pretty much the end of it. So Japan definitely had some fun with this, but yeah, apparently not super well received. Although Japan apparently did establish that this movie is canon to some of their films, so interesting.
Over on Twitter, funny enough, earlier this week, there was a tweet from MinMax, a podcast that I very much enjoy. They're sort of like, they're not friend of the show. I haven't got those guys on our show yet, but there's been some crossover with the fandom. So what's the next acquaintance of the show? Friend of the show? Anyway, they sent out a tweet that just asked, what's a movie or TV show that you were shocked made you cry? And one of the responses jumped out to me, so I reached out to him. I got the permission to read their tweet here. But first name Clate responded to that tweet and said, the Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie. 9-year-old me wanted her to have her babies and be happy. So when she got tangled up in the bridge cables and shot with missiles, I absolutely lost it in the theater. Oh, sweet, sweet baby. I love that. I love that tweet. I love the idea of a child thinking that way. Like, obviously, at that point in the movie, you're supposed to be thinking, like, yeah, we finally got the monster. But they're like, they're her babies. I want this thing to be happy. But I can totally see, like, especially a child, that's about how old I was when I saw it, thinking that. Because the movie, it makes it a point to make us, like, sympathetic to the monster and see her babies get killed. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to want the creature to die. Then it's sad when it does die. You see her eye close in front of Matthew Broderick. So kind of weird playing with the emotions there, but it got first name Clate here, brought some tears to their eyes.
And I agree that and interestingly enough, that Dean Devlin actually kind of stated that decision to make Godzilla kind of sit in that gray area was one of the things he actually #PP kind of regretted about the film, because Godzilla, like, you're genuinely made to feel sympathy for Godzilla. And like the ending of this movie, like you're watching Matthew Broderick like stare at Godzilla as it dies on this bridge, like entrapped in cables and missiled to death. And I can't fault somebody for feeling sad in that moment, especially given the fact they just killed all of its babies. Like, it's like, great, you just killed all of its children, and then you trapped it on a bridge and killed it. Like, this is sad. Like, this is awful. Like,
Yeah.
so I can absolutely see people being like, that hitting for people. And I think that, I don't know if I'd say that that's one of the issues with the film, but I think that kind of placing him in that gray area definitely, because who are you supposed to be rooting for here? Like, you don't really know. Because Godzilla's destroying the city, but as the movie goes on, they just simply establish that, like, Godzilla is just like responding to its normal instincts. Like, it found what it thought was a safe place to basically lay eggs and nest, essentially, and it just landed right in the middle of humans. And it's a heck of a thing. So I can't fault someone at all for feeling that was a really sad thing, especially if you like Godzilla.
Yeah. Andrew, I got a question for you. I expect you to know everything here, right?
Okay.
They use a term in this movie I've only heard in movies. As they're tracking Godzilla, they mention that it's only 200 miles off the Eastern American seaboard. They use the term Eastern Seaboard a few times. What the hell is that? Is that not the East Coast? What's a seaboard?
My understanding is it has always been the coast, but let's see what the internet says real quick. It says, a seacoast. That's the first definition of seaboard, is the seacoast.
So do they just use seaboard because it sounds more official for movies? Like, why
I
can't they
guess.
say it's off the coast? Anyway. All right. Andrew, there's a quick shot of a news reporter, and I just got his name as Rob Fukuzaki. And it just stood out to me. I thought maybe it was an Easter egg or something. It's not. But Rob Fukuzaki is known for being one of the first prominent Japanese-American news reporters. He's an actual news reporter, started in L.A., and I gotta think it's no mistake they cast him here with his Japanese-American heritage. It feels like, to me, a nice nod to the history of Godzilla and where it comes from.
I think so. That's fun.
I like that. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. You know what else is fun?
What, Chris?
Jean Reno doing his American accent, which is just an Elvis impression.
Yep. That's one of the moments from this movie that was like burned into my brain when he speaks like it was them chewing the gum and then his Elvis impression, because that was like just his whole, it makes us look more American. I was like, does it though?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
You know, during the credits to this movie, we're treated to a Puff Daddy song. Because, baby,
We are.
it's 1998. Not only is it Puff Daddy, but it's Puff Daddy featuring Jimmy Page. He doesn't just sample Led Zeppelin. He brings the guy back to redo the riff for his song. And after that, another song plays, and it is a cover of the David Bowie song Heroes. And I recognize the voice. I mean, that's Jacob Dylan singing Heroes. And I looked up the soundtrack, and sure enough, the Wallflowers covered Heroes for this soundtrack. Man, soundtracks used to be a thing. They had like exclusive songs. And in fact, the soundtrack is called Godzilla the Album. Look at that prestige. It was certified platinum and ranked number 56 on the Billboard's top selling albums of 1998. The soundtrack was a big hit.
You know what's weird to me, dude?
What's that?
I've never called you dude on this show before, I don't think.
That was weird. I wasn't going to call it out. I was going to let it slide, but
I
You know what, dude?
You know what, dude? Listen
Bruh.
here, bruh.
What's up, my main man?
Listen here, bruv. No, that Heroes cover by the Wallflowers, I know from the end of The Replacements, which is
Oh.
another movie we just recently talked about, because it plays during like the final moments of that film before the credits start, when like it's the wrap up and like they've won the game and they're all about to be out of jobs. But it's, yeah, I know it from there. So I'm guessing this is a all-star Mystery Men situation where the song originated in a movie I was unaware of and then associated it with a later film by mistake, admittedly.
Well, you can now get that corrected, Andrew.
It's so weird when you see things like there's a Rage Against the Machine song that was released on that soundtrack and then
Yeah, of
was not
all
released on one of their
bands.
albums.
to do a soundtrack exclusive song, Rage Against the Machine. Different times.
It's so weird because a lot of these singles and these band songs literally were released on this album, and they were not because that was the thing. Like, if you wanted these songs by these bands, you had to buy this
Gotta
CD.
get the soundtrack. Yep.
You had to do that. You couldn't
Or wait
find
10
it
years
in other
for the
places.
band's greatest hits CD.
And
Red Hot Chili
was
Peppers.
included.
One of my favorite Red Hot Chili Pepper songs, Soul to Squeeze, was made for the Conehead soundtrack. So, like, if you want to hear that song, gotta get the Conehead soundtrack until the greatest hits, which didn't come out until, like, I don't know, 2003, 2004, or whatever. So I got that greatest hits. Literally, I had all their albums already, but I bought it just so I could have Soul to Squeeze.
There's a song by the Violent Femmes that's a cover of No More Heroes that's on the Mystery Men soundtrack. I'm pretty sure to date that's still the only place to get that song, which is why Andrew owns the Mystery Men soundtrack. But it's because I look for that everywhere and I can never find it. I can never find that song. I don't know what the deal is with it, but yeah, that is definitely we just talked about it a couple weeks ago. That is a lost thing. The idea of like bands releasing singles with movies that were released with the movie, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. Yep. Andrew, there's a couple of notes I have on here. I'm not, let me make it clear, I'm not doing a David Letterman top 5 or 10 on this.
Oh gosh.
Because the thing I noticed is that there's a lot of moments in this movie that made me realize this is a pre-9/11 movie. Yeah, first and foremost, the World Trade Centers are prominent. You can see them in New York City. I think a lot of the destruction in New York they wouldn't have done in a post 9/11 world. But to get specific, these lines stood out to me. Our scumbag reporter, Kamen, who we establish, he's a bad guy, right? Saying this line. But you hear him on the phone and he says, "I just don't give a rat's ass about a war in some country I can't even pronounce." I mean, oof.
Yep.
It's a bad line. You don't want to hear that anywhere. But again, in a post 9/11 world, they're not saying that. And
no, even if it's the jerk saying it.
And then there's also they mentioned Godzilla is the worst act of destruction since the World Trade Center bombing. That
did stand out to me, and I was like, I feel bad. My genuine first thought was, "Oh, you sweet summer children."
It's a different time, Andrew. It's a different time.
It was a very, very different time, and
Andrew, I mean, there's a lot of movie. This movie is well over 2 hours, a lot packed into it. I think we've hit the high points, though. I mean, these action scenes, you kind of divorce it from the criticisms of the movie and what it means to be Godzilla, and all the things we talked about. They're fun, well-designed action scenes. Like, Roland Emmerich knows how to make a big, dumb blockbuster that's a lot of fun. So if you think this is sacrilege to the Godzilla name, like, I'm not going to argue with you. But you kind of divorce it from all that. You got some fun stuff to enjoy here. Does that ultimately make it a great movie? Look, that's not for us to try to decide or convince you of. But there is some fun to be had in this film for sure.
I agree. I think, like I said, I gave my rousing TED talk about it earlier, but that I think the Godzilla name is the sticking point for a lot of people. Just it's a giant monster movie. I don't think, and it would have been that thing where they're like, oh, this is kind of like an American Godzilla. But by actually calling it Godzilla, I think you attached expectations to it that for some fans just weren't there. And is it good? Is it bad? That's for the scholars to debate 1,000 years from now. But it's, I think, as a Roland Emmerich monster movie, I think it's got a lot of fun to be had.
Andrew, like I said earlier in the episode, Godzilla has been rebooted since this time. We've got a whole new Godzilla universe. He fights a big old monkey. But specifically, do you like that 2014 Godzilla movie?
I do.
I do too. I think it's really good. I think it's mostly well received, but it does have like its own backlash.
It does.
People explain like
It
you don't
does.
see him enough, or see Godzilla enough. But I think that's, if you want to make like an American Godzilla movie that feels like an American blockbuster, an American monster movie, I think it's about as good as it gets. And I really liked it.
I think so. Yeah, there was a definite. I have friends that don't particularly like it just because you don't see Godzilla very much in it. No, and that's there are definitely Godzilla movies where it's just big, dumb, fun Godzilla beating stuff up the whole movie. We've seen some in the theater, so I get that expectation, but I think it was riding a very fine line of trying to create something that honored Godzilla but still felt like a blockbuster, and I liked it a lot. I think it was pretty good, and that universe is continuing. Apparently, Godzilla versus Kong will be getting a sequel, so more to come from that, apparently.
More to come, but for now, it's time for our question of the week. Question this week doesn't come from Mike Lynch. Mike, you're all over this episode, buddy. Here's what he says. The Offer is a show about the making of The Godfather. Andrew, have you seen this? Heard about this? Have you seen this?
I've heard about it. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, me neither. But he goes on, what movie would you pick to dramatize its production history? And who would you cast? Great question, Mike. This is a bit of a thinker. So, a movie where the story of the movie happening was interesting enough for its own show. I got it. Super Mario Bros. I want to see a show about how that came together in the chaos that happened behind the scenes. As far as who you would cast, I mean, bring John Leguizamo back to play himself because he looks exactly the same. The man doesn't age. Bob Hoskins is a little bit tougher. Danny DeVito's too old to play Bob Hoskins.
Not with that attitude.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be fun. I would either take a documentary about it would be fun too, but specifically he's talking about a drama version of it. Yeah, Super Mario Bros. I don't know. I don't have any hot takes for who I would cast. I'm sure they would. I'm not a casting director. Someone could do a good job there. But that story, I think, is definitely interesting enough. Like, what was the original pitch? The bickering between the husband and a wife director duo, all the drinking that happened behind the scenes. Like, I think there's a lot to work with there.
That's a good one. That would be a really interesting one to see. I mean, there's a couple that come to mind off the top of my head. Like, there was in the 90s, they tried to make an adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's Marlon Brando. And like, apparently like days before filming was set to start, Val Kilmer came in and was like, I want my role cut back from like the starring role to being a supporting role. And like, just such a mess from like start to finish. And like, most of that's been pretty well documented though. And I don't know how interesting that would be to watch. Like, because that's the line between some of these things for me. It's like, there's so many things that have troubled productions, but I'm like, would it just be depressing to watch? Like, what's the line between interesting and depressing? Because like another one that immediately comes to mind is Heaven's Gate, which was another of Michael Cimino's big epics that like spiraled out of financial control and like bankrupted the studio that made it. And then it came out and everybody was like, whoa, this dude is way full of himself at this point. And like, it's another one that's been recut like 14 times over the years and trying to find, because it was a movie that started like 5 hours long. It was ridiculous. But something like that, I feel like I would just be annoyed watching. I would be watching this movie and its increasingly troubled production. And I would just be like, I hate all of you. Like, I'm sad that this movie got released because none of you deserved it. That's how I feel I'd end up at some of these. The Godfather is like really kind of lightning in a bottle. Superman, like Richard Donner's dismissal from Superman to Superman 2 might be interesting. Just how he goes from like being the golden boy that directs Superman to suddenly getting the boot for Superman 2. Some of the Rocky movies might have a really interesting story. Even just a story about Rocky getting made would actually probably be really interesting. Just because of Stallone's kind of pedigree coming into that. And how he kind of had to fight to be in his own movie.
Speaking of The Godfather and troubled productions, Apocalypse Now would also probably make for a good dramatized version because
Turns out Francis Ford Coppola has a hard time.
Yeah.
Now
Now
this movie's made.
there is a famous documentary already called Hearts of Darkness about the production, but again, a drama version where you can maybe inject some levity and make fun of what happened behind the scenes and how long that shoot took. And I guess what we're getting at here is anytime Marlon Brando was involved, it's probably
it's gonna have problems.
Yes.
Superman, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
This guy ever made a movie that went well.
That movie, The Score, there's a lot of famous behind the scenes stories there. Apparently there's a scene where it's like a close up of his face during the scene. That's not what it's supposed to be. But he refused to wear pants, so that's how they had to shoot it. Because he wouldn't wear pants to the set because he hated the director.
Then why even agree to do it, dude? Like, Jesus.
I don't know.
Like,
Andrew, the man's dead. Don't speak ill of him.
I will speak whatever I want. There's so many, and that's the thing. It's like, what has a troubled production that would be interesting to see about? It's like The Godfather is a thing that, like, once it gets to the finish line, it's like one of the greatest films of all time. It's this massive achievement. And it's I can see that story being interesting to tell, but I think getting into a lot of it's easy to find a movie with a troubled production, but is it an interesting troubled production? Or is it just like egos getting out of control that just lead to a mediocre film? So Super Mario Brothers, unironically, is one that I think would be really interesting. I think that would just to see how that project starts at the video game and ends up as that movie, I think would be very interesting. Blade Runner. Go ahead.
Well, Blade Runner is a good one. No, because that famously, the crew had shirts that they about how much they hated Ridley Scott. I don't remember what the shirt said, but it was like "F you, Ridley Scott" or whatever. So that would be good. That might border on like this is kind of depressing, but like you said, the end result ends up being one of the greatest movies of all time. So that's that to look forward to. With Super Mario Bros., I love the juxtaposition of behind the scenes, everyone is miserable and yelling at each other, but then they have to put on this red and blue coveralls and go dance with a dinosaur or whatever. Like the juxtaposition of what we end up with on screen and the venom being spewed behind the scenes is very fun.
Yeah, that's one that just it feels like there's a lot of tea that I would enjoy hearing about. Like the current one is this, like, it feels like the story of this movie, it's going to come out or it may have come out by the time this airs. Don't Worry, Darling. That whole drama that's just endlessly going on and still going on. That one's interesting though, because the early reviews for the movie are not great, but just all the stories that have leaked out about that film, it's just like, I feel like somebody's already shopping the tell-all documentary to everybody they can think of, trying to figure out how to make that happen. But yeah, movies are tough things. It really is like a ridiculous thing to think about, just how many people have to come together for a film to happen, and inevitably they can't all go well. Like the production, I feel like the productions where nobody has an issue with anything are far outnumbered by the ones where somebody has a problem
100%.
with something. So
100%. If you've got any movies that you think would their story of being produced anyway would make for an interesting drama or series or movie, let us know. Hop into that Discord. There's a link in our show notes. You can tell us your answer there. You can also visit the Question of the Week channel and submit a question of your own to be featured on a future episode. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
I mean, it looked like something Roland Emmerich. Yeah. I mean, it looked like something Roland Emmerich. Ah, Jesus.
Emmerich.
It looked like something Roland Emmerich would have made.
Godzilla. You'll get caught up in the Godzilla. Crossfire.
Crossfire. Oh, dude. Dude, that song lives in my head. I'll be like driving to work one day and I'll just be like, Crossfire.
Is that on Spotify?